Well, hello again, and I'm looking at something to share with you today, and I was looking at the early part of Matthew. I'm going to actually be dealing with Matthew chapter 8, but what I found when I was reading through this is something quite interesting. That the beginning of Matthew is, of course, the birth of Jesus. And there's quite a lot about it in Matthew with genealogies and so on. And then in chapter 3, you come to John the Baptist. And this is where Jesus actually is baptized and receives the Holy Spirit. And then in chapter 4, he was tempted of the devil. Then when it gets to chapter 5, he goes into a mountain, and there you get his main teaching. And it's there's a reason why I'm looking at this, because he has already called some of his disciples, but the interesting thing is this, that even at this stage in the ministry of Jesus, which is coming just after his baptism and his temptation of Satan in the wilderness, that you'll find Jesus began preaching. And in chapter 4, verse 23, it says, Jesus went about all Galilee preaching. But his fame went throughout Syria and the Decapolis and Galilee, from Judea, the whole of Judea, and from Transjordan. So even at this stage, his ministry, and this is only chapter 4 of Matthew, his ministry is already reaching a vast area. And because I'm looking to see why in chapter 5 he saw multitudes and took them into a mountain. But it's quite clear that his teaching at this point was very strong. He was in the synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, healing all manner of sickness and disease. And his fame went out so widely at this stage. And I was quite touched with that, because then he comes down from the mountain, and in chapter 8, he's just come down from his teaching on the mountain, and the crowds followed him. And there was a leper, and a leper came and said to him, and I'm quite fascinated with this because, preaching the gospel, and I'm sure some of you are witnessing and preaching the gospel, it says that a leper came to him and said, if you want, Lord, you can heal me of leprosy. Now, that was a very strong, bold statement. So even at this stage in his ministry, there was an incredible level of faith in Jesus. And this continues. Yes, of course, he was healed immediately. And Jesus simply says, don't tell anyone, but go to the priest, because with leprosy, you had to give evidence of your cleansing and make sacrifices with the priest. But by verse 5, Jesus came into Capernaum, and then a centurion comes to him. Now, this man is not a Jew. You know the situation. He's a Roman centurion. The Romans were the conquerors who had driven the Greeks out of the whole of that area, including Jerusalem, had conquered the land. And at the time of Jesus, virtually the whole of Jerusalem, the whole of Israel, was under martial law. You have to realize they were under martial law, and they're actually paying taxes to Rome. That was, it was quite interesting, because that's what the Romans did when they conquered places. They forced them to pay tax. And that's what funded Rome, were the taxes from the conquered lands. But this man, who's not a Jew, who's a Roman and part of the occupying forces, simply came to him, and this is verse 5, came to him in centurion, in Capernaum, and said, "My servant is at home sick of the palsy and grievously tormented." In other words, he was paralyzed. Palsy was paralyzed. Palsy is a form of paralysis. And Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." Yes, I mean, that's Jesus, the willingness. He would even go to the Roman and heal the servant. But the centurion said, "No, I'm not Jewish. I'm not one of your followers, and I'm not good enough. Although I'm an officer in the Roman military, I'm not worthy," because, I mean, you know what those Roman officers were getting up to, believe me. They weren't kind, gentle people in normal. They were quite brutal. In fact, one assumes that he was Roman, but in actual fact, the Romans were using slave labor in their military. And it's quite an interesting thing, because what we see here, it's not as clear and as simple as it looks when you question the background. So this centurion, whoever he was, says, "No, I'm not a good man, and I've got no right to ask you to come to my house." And then he says something quite interesting. That's very interesting here. He says, "Speak only a word, and my servant will be healed." Now, it's very interesting, because I've referred to the teaching on the mountain, and the last verse of chapter 7 is quite interesting, because here the people were astonished at his teaching, because it says he taught them as one having authority. So it's quite clear to me that it's not only the centurion who recognizes the authority of Jesus, but the people themselves saw the authority. He taught them as an authority, not as a scribe. A scribe was teaching from the book. And, you know, there's a vast difference between teaching from the book and speaking with authority and practice. I mean, one thing about my ministry is that right back in the early days when I was still a pastor, the Lord actually said to me, he said, "Shut up, stop talking, I'm tired of listening to you." Now, for the Lord to say that to me through the Holy Spirit was pretty condemning. "I'm tired of listening to you." And he said, "Stop talking, go out, do everything that you're talking and telling other people to do, and don't come back till you've done it." So my whole life has been putting into practice what I believe.